Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We are your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lindsay, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine. Every week, Mark and I join you to discuss trending topics in the wine world. How are you doing this week, Mark?
How are you, Kim? Good to see you remotely again. It's crazy we're not in the studio again.
I know, still not in the studio. I don't know when we'll be back, but hopefully someday we'll be able to do this across the table from each other and have a glass of champagne while we do it.
Yeah, we need to get some wine back.
We do.
Right?
We absolutely do.
So what's first today, Kim? I know we picked some new things today, right? So
we did. So we're working on some new articles for you, our listeners. And the first one comes to you from Wine Enthusiast magazine. And it is about mold on wine bottles. Sometimes if you store your wine either in a refrigerator or in a cellar, you might find that your bottles have gotten a little moldy. And some people are a little concerned about that. So we wanted to address that issue because I know, at least from my restaurant days, it is something that I see an awful lot of. But I can't imagine you see this too much in a retail environment, except maybe in the refrigerator.
Yeah, there's not a lot of wine being stored for a long period of time in a high humidity type setting in retail. But I wanted to ask you, Kim, when I saw this story, when I hear mold in wine, I have two different pictures in my mind. One being like a wine cave that for hundreds of years, these wines are sitting there and they're just disgustingly moldy with cobwebs. Mm-hmm. And then the other image I have is when you pull off the foil on a wine, on the cork, you might have some mold. So when you heard the topic of the article, what did you think of it was going to be about as far as mold? Mold on the labels, mold on the corks?
Yeah, I didn't think about the cork thing. I didn't think about when you pull off the capsule that sometimes your cork looks a little funny and might have some, fuzzy green stuff growing on it. My first thought absolutely was the same as yours, where you sometimes we'll see these pictures of old cellars full of port or full of Bordeaux that have been down there for like 50 years, and they're all covered in like gray, dusty mold.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that I thought of.
Horror movie wines is what
kind of. Yeah, it's like dank cellars, and you're like, this is a little creepy. But the second one I thought of was actually labels, because I've seen a lot of moldy labels, and I had heard that was because a lot of mold spores actually like to eat the glue that attaches the label to the bottle. So I know I've seen a lot of refrigerated wines that the bottles themselves are not necessarily moldy, but it's the label that starts to get a little discolored and starts looking kind of not so nice.
Well, that's interesting. I never heard the glue thing. So This article started out, Kim, saying the mold develops because of high humidity conditions. Exactly. So you're saying you've heard where just the glue alone without humidity causes mold?
No. This is like in a refrigerator.
Oh,
so
okay.
In a
so
refrigerated
still humid
environment,
affects the glue. Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah. So I think that the common denominator for all of these is humidity, and that is really what this article tried to get across, was that in environments of high humidity, which you want if you're storing your wine, because a higher humidity environment keeps the cork from drying out. So it's actually really good for the wine inside the bottle, but does create an environment that does lead to the development of mold a lot of the times. So yeah, that seems to be the thing that all of these situations have in common. If you've got an area that is relatively humid, you might get some mold growth on your bottles.
Yeah, now listeners probably be surprised that the humidity recommendation for wine is 50 to 80% humidity, nothing over 80% humidity. I mean, that's humid.
Yeah, that's pretty humid.
Good conditions for wine, though. So I want to get back to the cork issue we talked about first, Kim, before we talk about the labels. When you remove the foil of a wine, the cork underneath, a lot of times you said there can be mold under there. My understanding, one of the procedures for the sommelier, you being in the restaurant industry, you pull the foil, they're supposed to have a cloth and clean the cork top, right? Now, is that cleaning
Yep.
specifically to clean off mold or just anything that's on top? I mean,
It's
I
really,
always thought,
yeah, it's really for anything that's on there.
okay. So
Yeah.
if there was mold on it when you pull it off, can it be wiped off just with a simple cloth on a cork?
A lot of times. I know
Yeah.
I've seen that I've opened bottles sometimes and there has been just a little bit of, some sort of residue on top of the cork, and it does tend to wipe away pretty easily. And I think a lot of
Personally,
that is
Personally, I never rub them off. I just leave it on there, put the
Just
cork
leave it
screw
on?
right
Yeah.
through it. Yeah, yeah. In a
I mean, I
restaurant,
would
though,
too for my own consumption, but if I'm going to be presenting it to somebody else, I want to make sure that all of that is nice and clean. And it's part of the presentation.
Yeah,
And sometimes
presentation.
if there's a little bit of like cork dust or just a little bit that gets on there, just it makes it look a little bit nicer when you have a nice clean surface that you're pulling the cork from.
and then you mentioned the mold on the labels, which this article had some great tips for cleaning the labels. Did you see the couple of the mixtures they said?
I did.
Have you ever tried any of this?
I'm trying to remember what we used to do back in the store to clean off moldy bottles. I think we probably just sprayed them down with like Windex or some sort of bleach solution, which maybe was not the best thing for the bottles. But they do suggest using either a hydrogen peroxide solution or a weak vinegar solution. And I know that I use vinegar solutions for a lot of the cleaning that I do for like my pickling experiments and my canning and my beer making and that kind of stuff, because it is food friendly. You're using something that's already a food product. I would just when I read this, I thought, ooh, be a little careful using vinegar around your wine, because you wouldn't want those vinegar bacteria to get into your wine and start turning your wine into vinegar.
Yeah, plus the aromas of the vinegar and the hydrogen peroxide could really throw off the aromatics of the wine.
Right. So they do say take it out of your cellar before you clean it down. So, I don't think that they're suggesting clean it right before you're going to drink it, because you would have those smells, but just as a, as upkeep, upkeep for your wine bottles.
So they had a half cup white vinegar to 1 quart of water. And then the second thing was 3% hydrogen peroxide, spray it on kind of, let it sit 10, 15 minutes and then scrub it. But
and
if
I think
it's
that's
really
like the regular strength of hydrogen peroxide that you get in the, the big brown bottle.
3% is regular?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's just regular hydrogen peroxide.
And then it said if it's really bad mold, half a cup white vinegar to 1 quart hydrogen. Forget the water. Go right to the white wine vinegar, right? White vinegar. So I've never done that, but I thought it was a great tip that they told you how to do it if you needed to.
Yeah, I would personally, if it's just for my own consumption, I would probably just wipe them down or leave them messy. I'd probably just wipe it off so that it wouldn't get in my wine. But we're not doing a whole lot of presenting wine bottles to to friends and family these days. So I'm probably going to leave them messy.
Yeah. So this article, surprisingly, was all about really the labels, to clean the labels of the mold in the bottle, not anything to do with the cork.
Glass is a whole lot easier to clean than the label. So
yeah. And like you said, even in retail, it's all about presentation. If you have things that are being stored for a long time, you want to clean them up before you can sell them, just like in a restaurant, clean it up before you serve it. So it was an interesting article.
Yeah, and useful tips for if people are storing wine at home and have these questions. So that's what to do about your moldy wine bottle.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and you can find our past episodes at SoundCloud or iTunes. Next, we have an interesting article, Kim. We're going to go off of wine just for a little bit, because we found this article about how to stock your liquor cabinet and basically what should be in it. And then I figure at the end, Kim, we could say how to stock your wine rack and what should be on that wine rack. So how would you like to stock, Kim? I know you're a big mixed drink fan and you like to have a stocked bar at home. So did you find this interesting? Anything?
I did. It starts out pretty simple, but I think tries to get the consumer to do a little thinking about the kinds of things that they like to drink, so that you can have, on the one hand, a well-stocked bar in case you want to try to make a new type of cocktail, but then also have it stocked well enough that if you have 3 or 4 favorites, you will always be able to make those cocktails. So I think that that is something that probably a lot of people are doing a little bit more of as we're all staying at home. You're not going out to your favorite restaurant, sitting at the bar and having a cocktail. So why not learn how to make your favorite cocktails yourself from a fully stocked bar that you have at home?
And I think they had a good approach to this because it's like, this is the basics, but then don't forget, get what you like too.
Yeah, exactly.
And they call that kind of the special things you should get. So,
well, you should personalize it because, we all have different tastes for what we like. So, if someone is telling you to load up your bar with all these different, flavored vodkas or something, and you're just not a vodka drinker, then that's not really going to work for you. So I feel like they did start fairly simple and then gave some good ideas on how to expand from just the basics into making it a little bit more to the things that you enjoy drinking.
Yeah, so the basics, they recommended whiskey, which whiskey type, they wanted bourbon or rye. Now, bourbon is very popular. I suggest bourbon. Vodka, gin, white rum, and then tequila or mezcal. And I recommend tequila over the mezcal for basics.
Right. And those are really just the bare bones. And what's interesting about this list, I think, is that these are not necessarily spirits meant for drinking just on their own. These are for mixing. So I thought it was interesting that for the whiskey, they recommend bourbon or rye, which generally are mixing whiskeys, and they didn't say have a bottle of scotch or have a bottle of Irish whiskey or have any of those other things that people generally tend to drink just on the rocks. So this group of liquors that they recommend here really are for making cocktails with.
Yep. And then like you said, they said, well, that's the basic. Now you want something special. Now you go to the scotch or the single malts.
Right.
Or to maybe if you want tropical drinks, you go with an aged rum or a higher end rum, which
right.
I think is a good tip. You want to have something special, but I would tailor it to what you personally like too.
If you're someone like me who likes sidecars, then you need to have a bottle of brandy in there because that's what you need for that. Or if you like to drink margaritas, you're going to need some sort of orange liqueur like a Grand Marnier or whatnot. But we'll get to that in a minute. So you have the basics, and then figure out 3 or 4 different cocktails that that you enjoy drinking. Look up what goes into those cocktails and then make sure that you have those specialty spirits in your bar. The next category was good mixers. And it's always important to have good mixers around because they really are what makes a cocktail a cocktail. So ideas to have are tonic water, seltzer water, juices, sodas, all of those sort of fun flavored things that you want to add to your cocktail to make up the rest of the drink besides just the booze.
Yeah, and I think the mixer stuff is a lot of times a regional thing.
That's true.
For our area, I feel mixers, there's a lot of Bloody Mary mixers around our area. So I would think that's a popular mixer to have, especially if you have the vodka.
That's right.
And
I
then
always
they mentioned
ginger ale for mine because I like to do
ginger ale,
bourbon and ginger ale.
They mentioned specialty stuff like bitters, vermouth, which is also very handy. More vermouth, I would suggest, than bitters, unless you're do you use bitters in sidecar?
Yeah, I would say go the opposite direction. We have 5 different flavors of bitters in our liquor cabinet.
Yeah, so you're thinking,
See,
no, that's funny.
Different.
That's interesting. No, everyone's different. Well, you got to get both. Think if Kim comes over, you need bitters. If I come over, you need vermouth.
You want something funky in your bar, sort of weird bitters in there.
And then what was the last? They mentioned maybe some fresh fruits or garnishes. Should always have stuff on here for garnishes.
Well, I thought actually that this was a really important category was citrus because other things fall into that category too. And one thing that I always have in my refrigerator is sour mix because I guess I like sour things. So I like cocktails that have a sour component to them, but they're also really important for the balance of the drink because just like wine, you want your cocktail to have a balanced profile. So a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of sourness so that it's not just boozy. So I do feel that having a little bit of a sour component is very important for a lot of cocktails. Not necessarily a martini, but something like, your margaritas are going to need that. And if you like whiskey sours or amaretto sours, you're going to need that type of profile. And you can make your own. There's lemon and lime and orange, and there are recipes out there on the internet on how to make your own sour mix or your own margarita mix, or you can buy a better brand out there. But I feel like that is a very important thing for people to have in their fridge.
Yeah, it's a good point, because the sours, like you said, daiquiri, sour drinks, margaritas, it covers a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Covers a lot. And then they mentioned equipment, right? Was the last thing?
Yep. So, you need something, if you're going to make a shaken drink, you need something to shake your drink up in. And it can be as simple as just 2 glasses that you put your ice cubes and your ingredients in, and you shake them back and forth. I use shakers that have a little strainer in the lid. It's a little 3-part. There's the body of the shaker, and then there's a lid that has a strainer in it, and then there's a little cap to that, so you shake the whole thing up. They recommend using a different type of shaker, which I believe is called a Boston shaker, where it's a large metal cup and then a smaller glass cup that goes on top of that, and you just shake them back and forth between the 2 of those. So you need something to shake. You need some mixing glasses. You need jiggers, just so that you know the amounts that you are using. But honestly, if you don't have any of those things, but you do have a liquid measuring cup or other types of measuring equipment at home, you can make do with those things. I don't necessarily feel like people need tons and tons of equipment for making cocktails.
What do you think about one of the essential equipment things they said, Kim, was a bar spoon? Have you ever used a bar spoon?
I don't have a bar spoon.
Yeah.
I
don't understand why people, even like when they sell the specialty spoon to make a black and tan, it's a spoon. I don't know.
It's a spoon.
Like you said, a measuring cup could be for a jigger. I just don't understand the spoon thing. But
yeah, I mean, there is value in having, I think, a long spoon. So if you need to mix something up in your shaker, but if you, like, I've got, I don't know, 3 or 4 ice cream spoons that, the long ones that you eat ice cream sundaes with. I have a couple of those. So that's what I use for my cocktail spoons. I use those way more often than I do for cocktails than I do for ice cream. So that has double duty in my kitchen. So
the last thing they mentioned for equipment, Kim, I thought was probably a little outdated, but they did mention books, cocktail books, to make sure you can make a drink. Someone comes over, Kim says, I want a sidecar. I have no idea what the heck it is. I have a book. But then they said, well, now you can just basically use the internet and look up drinks, which I think everybody pretty much, you can put in any drink in the internet and find a million different versions of every drink. It's funny.
That being said, I have a whole shelf full
of books,
of mixology books.
It's fun. A lot of times I refer back to the classic books because these things that are on the internet they change so many times. It's like, what's the original way to do that? So you always go back to the original old time books.
And it's interesting when you look at the old classic recipes that some of them are so much simpler than you assume they would be. Like a margarita has like 4 ingredients.
Yeah.
Like, like you were just saying, a daiquiri has like 3 ingredients and it doesn't taste like a Bartles and James,
Yeah.
So looking back in some of those books, you can sometimes get a better idea of what the classic cocktail is supposed to taste like than this idea that we have in our heads. We went through this whole, it feels like, 15 years or even more where cocktails were so overly sweet and sugary that sometimes those classic cocktails really weren't that sweet. So when you look at the original recipe, you can get a better idea for the flavor profile there. One other thing that they did not mention to have in your liquor cabinet for cocktails that I have to put in there is sparkling wine, because I use bubbles in a lot of cocktails and it makes such a great floater on top of a lot of things, that I think that is something that is really, really valuable, especially if you keep them in little bottles. So if you buy 187s of Prosecco or of California sparkling wine and just have a few of those in your bar, and you want to make a sparkling sidecar or you want to make a spritz or something fun like that, you've already got them on hand. So I think I would add sparkling wine to the mixer category, because that's something that obviously it's me. So I use them an awful lot when I make cocktails.
That's what we're going to talk about next, what to stock in your wine cabinet.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Mark and Kim. You can find more information about Mark at his website, franklinliquors.com. and more information about myself at vinitaswineworks.com. To find older episodes of The Wonderful World of Wine, please go to SoundCloud or iTunes and search The Wonderful World of Wine. All right, so we're talking about stocking your liquor cabinet so that you can make some classic cocktails, but also some of whatever your personal favorites might be. And as sort of an add-on to that, we wanted to say what we feel you should have as far as your wine cabinet. So people probably have at least a little bit of a bar set up, but I don't think that too many people really have much of a wine closet or a wine cellar. What's that stat that we always talk about, that most wine is purchased within 2 hours of when people are going to drink it, Mark?
Yeah, and it's consumed within 2 hours. But I mean, the article was about stocking your liquor cabinet, but most people on the bar or their liquor cabinet have wine. So I thought, we should really say, and I know we're going to probably differ in what you should, stock at your house, but let's start with reds, Kim. What would you recommend? I was thinking 2 bottles of, what would you recommend people have for a red?
Like 2 different bottles of red?
Yeah, just 2 reds. You say these are what you should have in your home.
When it comes to red wine, I feel like there's so much out there for wine, and there's so much variety and different things that people like. You really should focus on having around what you like to drink. So let that be us giving you good advice to, if you don't like these wines that we talk about, then don't keep them in your house. Drink what you like. But I think a lot of it, because I drink a lot of wine with food, a lot of the wines that I keep on hand tend to be wines that go with the types of dishes that I like to cook. But that's not how everybody drinks. So what I think that people should have on hand for red wine, I think you should do something light and then something heavy, because that will give you a little bit of variety for whatever you happen to feel like on a particular day, or if you want to have it with a particular dish or not, or just on its own.
Yeah,
so
we're on the same page.
Yeah,
same page. Now, what they are, light and heavy, should depend on, like you said, what you like. And it's interesting you said that, because a lot of times people will be shopping for a party and they'll say, what should I get? And I said, well, get mostly what you drink. So when no one drinks anything and you have leftovers, you're happy with what's left over, right?
I love that advice.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's what a lot of times people don't think of that. Like, why should I get that guy, 2 bottles and he doesn't drink it and I'm going to be stuck with it. So so a light red, a heavy red. Same approach with whites, Kim, a light white and like a full-bodied white?
My approach for whites is a little different. I tend to go with a dry white and an off dry white. So I like to have a little bit of something sweet around, not super duper sweet, but I like to have a little bit of an off dry, slightly sweet wine with spicy dishes. So that is something that I almost always will have in my house. I'll either have an off dry Riesling, or I'll have maybe a Chenin Blanc that has a little bit of sweetness to it. And that's another example of that thing where I like to have wines around that I pair with certain dishes. So off dry white to go with spicy food, and then I like a really dry white as well. So I tend to find that Sauvignon Blanc fits that bill really, really well. And it's also excellent to cook with. So, if you're stuck and you got a recipe that calls for, you need a half a cup of white cooking wine, Sauvignon Blanc will almost always fit the bill for cooking wine.
Yeah, it's good advice. And then you might have a lot of people have a sweet palate, so something with a little bit more sweetness to it be good advice to have, I feel. Mm-hmm. What about rosé? Yes or no? Should people have a rosé in the house?
Yeah. Well,
because you like it.
Because we like it.
Yeah. So
that also can substitute in for that dry white, especially if you've got a really light rosé on hand and you have maybe somebody coming over in your little social circle that likes white wines, and maybe you don't have any more white wine on hand, but that rosé can really fit into that really, really well.
Two, like a sweet and a dry, you think, or just
I'd stick basic? Mostly with dry.
Basic. Okay.
Yep.
And you mentioned in the liquor cabinet have sparkling, I'm sure, also on the wine shelf.
Absolutely.
You want sparkling.
Yep. So Prosecco or Cava.
Many purposes.
Yep. And it never hurts to have a nice bottle of champagne around for those special occasions that maybe you have an emergency, really good thing happen to you and you need to have a bottle of bubbly on.
Or you just need a drink, right?
Or you just
Open it up.
Really
Mimosa.
What
about vermouth? Vermouth we mentioned in the liquor cabinet, but people don't consider vermouth wine, which it is. Do you suggest
Good point.
stocking vermouth?
I mean, I would have vermouth in the liquor cabinet for cocktails. their dry vermouth is an important element for dry martinis, and there are a lot of cocktails that are based on whiskey that do use red vermouth. So I think it's a good thing to have in your liquor cabinet, both white and red vermouth. Probably white is more important than red, but it can be handy to have both on.
Yeah, and I think for the listeners with the wine that you're stocking, don't be afraid to be seasonal with it. This time of year, maybe have a sangria. Wintertime, put in a little bit heavier red, maybe the sparkling, more Prosecco for mixed drinks, and then the winter, more traditional for celebrating special times. So
yeah.
What about
But
tools,
you don't have
Kim?
to be restricted to only, a couple of kinds of white and a couple of kinds of red. You might want to experiment with, well, I know I like Cabernet, so I'm going to have a couple of different Cabernets on hand. Or maybe you eat a lot of barbecue over the summer, so have a few reds that go particularly well with barbecue, like Zinfandel or Côte de Rhône. Fun to have a bunch of different things. And then it improves your palate too, because you might be opening something new and experimenting with that grape variety that maybe you don't have a lot of familiarity with. So, it's a fun way to work in learning about wine into kind of your everyday if you decide to, open something new to go with a particular meal. And then you can see, oh, this is how it goes with the food, or hey, maybe this doesn't go particularly well with this dish, but you're always going to be learning whenever you're tasting wine and drinking it with a meal. So I find that to be one of the really fun, fascinating things about wine, personally.
And then just finishing up, Kim, tools for the wine shelf or the wine cabinet, corkscrew.
You definitely need something to open that bottle with. Yep, so a corkscrew. I don't feel that people necessarily need a decanter, but it
looks good.
Pretty.
It looks good on the shelf. Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing that I absolutely could not live without in my wine drinking life in my house is a chiller sleeve. So I have these things that I keep in my freezer. I have 3 of them, and they are like ice packs that are shaped like a bottle of wine. They have Velcro on them. Some of them have Velcro, not all of them do. And you keep them in the freezer, and when you have a bottle of white wine or even a bottle of red that's too warm and you want to chill it down just a little bit, or if you want to keep your bottle of white cold, you just put this frozen sleeve around the bottle and it keeps your bottle cold. And I use mine literally every day. Maybe not every day, every other day.
My wine never gets warm.
Your wine never gets warm?
Never gets warm. Don't need that.
I don't turn my AC on a whole lot. So
there you go.
My house is very warm, so my wine needs to be kept cold. Any other tools that you like to keep around? I'm very simplistic when it comes to
simple
wine
stuff.
Wine glasses, basic wine glasses and a corkscrew and a wine chiller. Like those are my things.
Just let me open it. If the corkscrew doesn't have a knife, I like a foil cutter because I want to get the thing off real quick so I can get to the cork. But that's it. Like you said, basic stuff.
We're basic.
A lot simpler than the liquor cabinet stocking to stock your wine. So that's why
you can really simplify your wine collection.
Yes, a lot easier. That's why everybody should be drinking wine.
Right.
That's why we talk about it all the time.
And it's a great time of year for a refreshing bottle of white wine or rosé. So stock up.
Thank you for listening to The Wonderful World of Wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. We'd like any questions or comments. Please find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine, and we'll talk to you next week. Cheers.
Wine, wine, wine. Wine, wine, wine.